Buster Posey's takeover as San Francisco Giants president of baseball operations is fraught with risk. Here's why it won't work and why it will.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and RotoGraphs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show for 5.5 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And coming up on today's show, like I said, Buster Posey's takeover as Giants president of baseball operations is fraught with risk. And first I'm going to explain why it won't work. And then I'm going to explain why it will. And then we're going to get into something that doesn't get talked about as often, why there's risk for him personally, not just risk to the organization. So we're going to start with the risk to the organization. And it's as simple as this. It's essentially, in the modern game, unprecedented what Buster Posey is doing here. Just stepping into the role of president of baseball operations, which has gotten more and more complex over the years, with zero experience in the role. His experience, like his qualifications, I should say, are that he's a Hall of Fame player. So when I say it's unprecedented, I mean what's unprecedented is like just installing a Hall of Fame player who played for your organization, never wore another uniform, legend, icon, statue, all that coming, Cooperstown speech coming for Posey, 3 rings, MVP, Rookie of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year twice. So, I mean, he accomplished everything you could possibly accomplish on the field, but president of baseball operations is an enormous job that I think is way more involved than most fans are aware of. I'm just kind of guessing that, but not necessarily true. It could be that most fans are very aware of how involved this is. Based on some of the comments about Farhan Zaidi, though, I get the impression that those who thought he wasn't doing a good job kind of thought he wasn't doing much, but this is in fact like an all-encompassing position. Like, forget about having a work-life balance, right? You are just absolutely in the fire all year long, and there's really no breaks, and it's extremely competitive, Major League Baseball. It's gotten to the point where, and he mentioned this in the press conference, they asked him about analytics, and he didn't roll his eyes, but he was like, yes, of course we're going to use analytics, because if they're here to stay. And I believe he said something to the effect of, if you're not using analytics, like, you are going to be way, way behind. And analytics, frankly, is like putting it in the most basic terms. Like, if you think teams don't just like look at on base percentage, or like they shouldn't, like, man, like these teams are like operating like NASA. Like, they're trying to be as innovative and cutting edge and scientific as they possibly can. What makes it interesting, though, is that it's a game played by humans, right? And so it's different than launching a rocket into space. It's launching people out onto a baseball field, and also the outcomes are very unpredictable, and you can expect certain things, but you ultimately don't know what's going to happen. And I should point out at this point that, and this kind of ties into when I'll talk about why it will work, but I don't expect that Posey is going to be a traditional president of baseball operations, in the sense that I don't think that he will be able, based on his lack of experience, utter lack of experience in a front office and how complex it's gotten, to be the guy like running all aspects of the operation. I think he's going to have to heavily rely on many other people. And I'm going to save my thoughts on if I think he can do that for the next segment. But, like if you were to, whatever Farhan Zaidi did on a day-to-day basis, if you were to just say, here, Buster, like you do all of that and like come up with these ideas or whatever, it would probably go very poorly, would be my guess. And on the flip side, it's worth pointing out, like, the results speak for themselves. The Giants have not had a lot of success. Would the Giants have had, if it had been Posey the last 6 years instead of Zaidi, would they have had a 107 win season? Would the worst they have done been like a few games under 500? I don't think so. I think that you're probably looking at worse results if it's Posey kind of being the Farhan Zaidi of the team. I think as someone who can just like be the public facing, in charge of baseball operations person, you maybe couldn't have a better guy, because he can communicate. Although he, notoriously, he didn't say much to the media, and he was very vague to the media in his playing career. And, I'm not afraid, but, I believe that it'll probably be more of the same, where he's not going to give much away via the media, probably. And hopefully he does, because that's something that in general is frustrating in today's game, is how secretive teams are about everything. But Zaidi was more open than the previous regime. But Brian Sabian and Bobby Evans and company were notorious for being like airtight, including to other teams. Like, they were unapproachable. I think they polled a bunch of front office executives, and Sabian and company got rated as like the most difficult to like work with by other teams. And Zaidi, on the other hand, I think was pretty easy to work with, although he never pulled off those kind of significant moves. There were a lot of marginal moves that were better than most teams are able to make. But, for Posey, it's like there are certain things where I think that he can do well. Like when it comes to simple things like signing a free agent, like having a target and trying to convince them to sign, and helping come up with a number and helping convince them to sign. Although you can't talk to the player, right? Or is that just during the season? You can only talk to their representation. And so that's a factor too, is that pull you have with players. No, he can talk to the player. I know that, Farhan Zaidi met one-on-one with Bryce Harper, or not necessarily one-on-one, but in the same room, certainly, and with Judge and Ohtani, when they were pursuing these guys. So anyway, it's just a huge job that is going to someone with no experience, and you just don't see that in today's game. So there's a tremendous amount of risk. And later we'll get into the personal risk, which is significant as well. But coming up in just a minute, I'm going to completely change my tune and get into why this is going to work. So we'll do that in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode of Locked on Giants is brought to you in part by Game Time. I'm super excited for this upcoming World Series. Dodgers and Yankees. I would go, if I could, root heavily against LA, and it is just, a short drive, a short flight away. And I did go to a postseason game this postseason, had a ton of fun, and Game Time made the whole experience that much better, just way better, because when I'm buying tickets, I get panoramic views from my seats, which is super important when I'm going to a venue I've never been to before, which, is, I have not been to all the stadiums. So that's very important. And also, we're not just talking about sports with Game Time. We're talking concerts, theater, and so much more. And also, there's the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section a row, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, here we go. Now we're going to get into why Buster Posey taking over as Giants president of baseball operations will work. So I'm completely changing my tune here. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Good moment to point out this has not been every day for a few weeks. I have been dealing with personal issues, and I very much apologize that this show has not been out nearly as often as it is supposed to be. I'm doing the best I can, and I'm happy to be with you today. So, continuing on, why this will work. Number one, I think Buster Posey knows everything that I just said in segment number one, which is that he doesn't have the experience to do all the duties that the role requires. I don't know that he wants. In fact, I'm pretty confident that he doesn't want to take on all the responsibilities that this job normally requires, because he has a family, for example, and he has talked about how much when he retired, that was a big reason he retired, was he talked about his family and how he wanted to be a dad. And you can't be a present dad and have this job. You're really going to be absent much of the time with this job. And so it's going to be very interesting to see just how much he's involved, because this is not an advisory role. This is you are the one in charge of the San Francisco Giants, the roster, ultimately the roster, but also the entire minor league system. You are ultimately in charge when this is your position. And so you can't be just, spending most of your time at home and just texting your GM about things and have this job. That would just be super weird. And also, I'm not sure that a GM would really, I don't know, it would be, it's, okay, so that kind of falls under the category of why it won't work. Is I'm concerned, not super concerned, but I do have questions about who exactly is going to want this job to work under Buster Posey. Not that it's unappealing because of Posey. It's not like he's some bad personality at all. It's the odd dynamic is what makes me pause at who is going to want, basically who with far more experience in this type of role is going to want to take a job where you're working directly underneath someone who has zero experience in this job. Do you get what I'm saying? Would you want to work for a boss who you're way more qualified to do their job than they are? Does that make sense? But at the same time, I guess it could be that maybe we're thinking of qualification in the wrong way. Maybe qualification should have more to do with having been a player, But if that's it, then there's a lot of players out there, right? And so and there are plenty of players who move into these roles, but they usually kind of start slower. They don't just jump to the tippy top of the iceberg. They do something, they do something and then they move up and the cream rises to the top. The smart ones do advance, and we've seen Chris Young, former pitcher, now as the president of baseball operations for the Rangers, but he didn't just start there. We see Sam Fold. I think he's the general manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. He's a former player as well, but like, you're gonna have to be it's just gonna be very interesting for me to see, and it's probably going to happen soon, because once the World Series ends, you've got 5 days until free agency begins, and players have to make decisions on options, teams have to make decisions on options, and teams have to make decisions on qualifying offer, whether or not to extend the qualifying offer to anyone. The Giants don't have any super difficult option decisions of their own to make. Some of the players have option decisions, but the team itself doesn't have any. But still, nonetheless, they're going to need to hire a GM soon. So like, at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if any day they announced the hiring of a general manager. It's been a while. We just haven't been podcasting regularly to kind of say that, but they're getting close, probably. It's one factor is if they want to talk to people, or if they have a favorite in mind who works for the Dodgers or the Yankees, the teams that are still in it, or a team that just got eliminated. That could be holding things up. And that was the case with Farhan Zaidi, with the Dodgers having a deep postseason run. That's why that process, when they were looking for a new president of baseball operations back in 2018 in the winter months, took so long. But anyway, ultimately, it's not just about the GM. It's about surrounding himself with the right people all over. Because again, this is a huge job where you're overseeing literally hundreds of people. And I don't know how many major department heads, but you're in charge of all of them. And I think that Posey is a very smart guy. I think he knows his limitations. I think he's not prideful. And so he's willing to admit what he doesn't know. And he's going to be willing to listen. But also, I think he's very, very smart from a baseball sense. And so it's just super unorthodox. It's like a huge risk that I suppose in this type of scenario, usually when there's more risk, there's more reward as well. And so if it does work, I could, it potentially could go great. And it could set a new standard in the industry that former players should have more influence on the game, which isn't really a crazy concept. It kind of shifted in a major way, not kind of, it dramatically shifted towards more, Ivy Leaguers. And there's some word that somebody that I watch on YouTube uses to describe the Wall Streetification or something of baseball. But but at the same time, like I said when I mentioned NASA, right, you can't just have me or an astronaut. I don't know, that even the astronaut, you can't just have someone who is a space enthusiast just go be in charge of NASA. You know what I'm saying? You gotta have, it's not the perfect example, but anyway, I think that, the first big indicator is going to be who do they get to be their GM. And I hope that it's somebody good and that they have their pick of a lot of good candidates. I fear a little bit who's going to want to take on this very unorthodox position where they're beneath someone who has far less experience than they do. But at the same time, there's you want them to want to be here for the long haul, but at the same time, if like other teams are going to know that you're in that position as GM, you're going to have a bigger role than a typical GM even. And a GM is already a huge role. And so you know, if the Giants have success, there would be a lot of people after whoever gets picked as GM, if that makes sense, to be somebody else's president of baseball operations, which we've already seen with Zaidi's first pick of a GM, which was Scott Harris from the Chicago Cubs, which, you know, that was not a name people kind of were throwing out there. And then they pick him. He was very young, business school, you know, really hard worker, and goes to the Tigers, and Tigers had a really nice season and went to the playoffs and won a round against the Astros. And so, yeah, I mean, again, the why it will work, I should add connection to the current players, connection to like potential free agents, but also to the team. I should have said that at the very beginning of this segment. Connection to the team, like being able to get a feel for what's going on in the clubhouse and understanding what does that mean and what kind of action do you need to take from the top down that lifts the team. Because I think that was lost and gets lost in today's game, where, you know, the players get kind of treated like chess pieces a little bit and disposable, and they're just commodities, right? And I don't think you're going to get that at all with Buster Posey. Now, does that mean there won't be hard choices? No. Like you still got to make a decision on whether or not to tender a contract to Mike Yastrzemski, and it's kind of borderline. Like you still have to make that call, and you don't just do it because they're humans. You still have to be the guy to make tough decisions. Sometimes people are going to get DFA'd, you know, it's part of the job. But at the same time, I think that element of it is going to be to their benefit ultimately, in that you're going to have someone in charge who is way more understanding of what it's like to be a player, obviously, because we're talking about one who was Hall of Fame caliber, played for a great organization, won championships, played for a Hall of Fame manager. So nobody knows better what that kind of culture looks like in that clubhouse. And so bringing that up to the front office at the tippy top is going to be interesting. And it definitely could be part of why this works. But coming up in just a minute, if it doesn't work, or if it does, but if it doesn't, especially, Posey is taking on, I should say, real reputational risk by taking this job. So we'll get into what I mean by that in just a minute, and before we do. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So I'm over on FanDuel.com right now and checking out the next week's NFL odds. And for the 49ers, are they... Yeah, it's Cowboys at 49ers. The 49ers are heavy favorites against the Cowboys at -210. Point spread -4.5 with -105 odds. So check it out at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, as promised, we are going to get into how, you know, this is something that I have heard talked about, but maybe not enough. Reputational risk. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Again, I apologize that it has not been every day. Doing the best I can right now, but really happy to be with you today, and hopefully as much as possible moving forward. But So like I said earlier, Buster Posey is a guy who's done it all. And, he could run for mayor of San Francisco and win in a landslide. Like he's just that popular of a person. I mean, he could have a political career, not to get political on you, but he's so like kind of thoughtful and well spoken and likable and popular that, I mean, he could do anything really. And in what he's done, people have said, I heard this was part of the initial reaction. I heard Alex Pavlovich and George Kontos talking about this on the Giants Talk podcast, that, George Kontos in particular was talking about how Buster never fails. He's never failed at anything he's done. And newsflash, this is something he could fail at. There's no promises we've seen how hard it is. I mean, there are so many teams that struggle to be a top organization. And then even the top organizations have their naysayers. Like, I hate to use the Dodgers as an example, but I'm going to. They, consistently win the division every year except one in the last 11. And that, of course, was the Giants in 2021, taking it from them by one game, 107 wins, haha. But ultimately, the Dodgers had the last laugh winning the division series. That's neither here nor there. But, despite all that regular season success, their fans, not right now, but in general, are irritated by their lack of postseason success, and understandably so. So even if you turn your team into a juggernaut, but you fail to win at all, you're going to get heat. And so that's like that's like second best case scenario. Best case scenario is you win, championships. And really, if you win one, it probably buys you significant grace periods. And really, Posey himself, just by nature of being Buster Posey, is going to have a significant grace period. But this team has already been floundering, right? And so if they start taking steps backwards, like let's just say next year, they're like 10 wins worse than they were this year, and the farm system doesn't make significant strides, and the free agents that they sign like regress and they look like bad contracts, all of a sudden the narrative starts to change a little. Like any failure, and just like Farhan Zaidi got a ton of heat the whole time he was here, it's not going to be as bad, because I think people, like I said, will give Buster Posey more grace for valid reasons. That he's a legend of the franchise, maybe the most important, definitely one of the most important players in franchise history. But what if he fails at this job? And it would be blind optimism to say there's no chance he fails, right? So there's a chance that he doesn't do well. And in that case, he's taking on reputational risk, because that'll be part of it. Could be how he gets remembered. It's like, yeah, great player, but man, did he really stink as the president of baseball operations for the Giants? Like, they were in an okay position when he took over, as I would say they are. They're not, the Rockies or something, like some team that's just perpetually losing 100 games and, has nothing really bright pointing to a brighter future. They're not in that position. They're in like a okay position. And if I don't know, like, yeah, they need to win now. They don't. This is not going to be the start of some kind of rebuild or something. This is a team that has aspirations of winning immediately. And so if they don't, then it is going to be, I think, harder for the media to be tough on him. I think you will see sugarcoating and benefit of the doubting, which we saw a lot less of with Farhan Zaidi than we did of the previous regime. I think again, for valid reasons. You see 3 championships in a 5-year span. It buys you a lot of goodwill. That's understandable. If Zaidi had 3 rings under his belt, then it would be kind of hard to give him too much criticism, even if it was like 5-6 years later. So anyway, this is just a job that comes with a ton of scrutiny, as it does when you're a player. But when you're a player, they dispose of you pretty quick. In this role, it's a bigger deal when you get disposed of, and he's not the type of guy that would be easy to fire. Although Greg Johnson did say, like, someone asked him, how do you fire Buster Posey? And he said, easy. It's the same way you fire anybody else. So I don't know. Maybe Posey would just, if it wasn't working out, he would have the, he wouldn't have too much pride to step away and say, I think this organization will be in better hands with this person, and hand it off, and do it in a very Posey way, just like the way he retired. He's like, I'm out. It's just not right for me anymore. So I'm out. So I think if it did go poorly, he would recognize his own limitations and probably handle it that way. But at the same time, he's on top of the world, and now he's in a position where he's going to be potentially taking criticism from the people who, loved him unconditionally. So now there's conditions, I think. There are at least some. If the team just if the moves that are made really don't work out, it's going to be hard for even the most, the biggest Buster Posey fans to defend him. If it's like, wow, you signed this guy for $150 million and he's horrible, and you did it with like 3 different players and they're all horrible, that's kind of the situation that Zaidi inherited, right? And when I say horrible, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but like Johnny Cueto and Jeff Samardzija and, Evan Longoria and like Denard Span and all these guys, they just weren't worth what they were being paid. And they had a huge $200+ million payroll and a 98 loss team, in 2017 at least. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Oh, and also, by the way, for your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings you a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every aspect of the playoff picture. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a ton, so thank you in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again, hopefully tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.